U.S. troops attacked in Jordan. Will the Biden administration finally respond? Plus, a major border showdown with Texas. Its verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, nice to be with you in person. We were going to have a show that dealt a lot with the border. It was our lead story. And then, unfortunately, we got this new news coming out of Jordan. What we have now at time of recording is 3 U.S. troops have been killed and 25 injured in this drone strike by Iran-backed militias in Jordan. I want to get your reaction to this because this is not a new tactic. Depending on what count you look at, this is somewhere between 150 to 170 plus attacks on U.S. troops in the Middle East being done by these proxy groups of Iran. What is America's response to this? What is the Biden administration doing, and what are we hearing from them?
Well, it is tragic. On Sunday, 3 U.S. servicemen and women were murdered. 25 were injured in Jordan. It was a drone attack funded, directed by Iran. And this is a continuation of a pattern we've seen for 3 years. Listen, number one, our prayers are with the families of those servicemen and women killed. At this point, we don't have the details. Our prayers are with all of the troops who were injured, that they recover. But we should also understand why this happened. Joe Biden's weakness produced this attack. At this point, Joe Biden's national security failures, his weakness, his appeasement is endangering U.S. lives and is causing casualties. We've talked a lot in this podcast about the 13 servicemen and women murdered in Afghanistan, again, because of Joe Biden's weakness. And understand, as you noted, there have been over 170 attacks by Iranian proxies on U.S. troops. Iran is waging war on the administration, on America, on our servicemen and women, and Joe Biden is so utterly weak, he doesn't do a damn thing about it. Reminds me back when Bill Clinton was in office, the phrase, he fires a missile and hits a camel in the butt. That basically is Joe Biden's approach. And our servicemen and women will continue to be in harm's way as long as this man is commander-in-chief, because not only is he too weak to respond with force, but even worse than that, Biden funded this. Understand, Joe Biden is responsible for flowing roughly $100 billion to the Iranian regime, to the Ayatollah, to the mullahs. That is funding these attacks. The October 7th attack on Israel, murdered over 1,200 Israelis, was among the worst terror attacks in the history of the United States, with the Americans who were murdered. Joe Biden, in a very real sense, funded that as well. And ironically, look, the left thinks that weakness avoids war. The left thinks that appeasement is the way to go. Weakness makes war more likely. Bullies do not respect weakness. And you contrast this when Donald Trump was president. He killed Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Iranian military responsible for the murder of hundreds of servicemen and women. He ordered a strike. He took them out. And you saw Iran behave differently.
And let's remind people, when he did that, the media said that he was taking us to World War III, to the brink of World War III, that it was irresponsible and it was the wrong decision, yet clearly there was a response, as you said, from Iran. And
yes,
the response was a response we should be begging for right now.
Well, that's right. They dramatically scaled down their attacks. And remember, Trump combined that with pulling out of the Obama-Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah.
That was the right decision to make. It was a decision that I urged Trump emphatically and repeatedly to do. Both the State Department and Defense Department under Trump argued to stay in the nuclear deal. They were both wrong. And Trump agreed with me, overruled his own Secretary of State, his own Secretary of Defense, pulled out of that deal. But not just that. He combined it with vigorously enforcing oil sanctions. So once we pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, there was still in place what were called oil waivers. So we had a waiver that allowed Iran to sell. At the time, they were selling roughly 1 million barrels a day of oil. I urged the president, once we pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, okay, let's end the oil waivers. Let's cut off their money. And there was a fight this time between the State Department and the Department of Energy. The Secretary of State at the time was Mike Pompeo, And State argued if you end the oil waivers, the result will be the price of oil will skyrocket, the price of gasoline will skyrocket. You can't do that. The Department of Energy, to its credit, you would think energy would know something about energy.
Yeah.
They responded, that's nonsense. There's plenty of global supply of oil. Cut it off. I leaned in aggressively on the side of the Department of Energy, said, starve the beast, take away the resources that Iran is using to murder Americans and murder our allies. Trump agreed with me, again overruled his own State Department, ended the oil waiver, and it turns out we now know energy was right, State was wrong. It crushed the Iranian economy, and the price of oil barely moved at all. The price of gasoline barely moved at all. It had essentially no impact because of global supply, but it cratered the Iranian economy. Joe Biden inherited the Iranian economy on its knees. We had cut their oil exports to 300,000 barrels a day or less, so it was a massive decrease. And Joe Biden came in, he flowed $10 billion to Iran, he flowed $6 billion to Iran, and he stopped enforcing the oil sanctions. That ended up flowing $80 billion to Iran. Wow. Today, Iran is selling 2 million barrels a day of oil. These rockets, these drone attacks that just killed 3 servicemen and women, Joe Biden, in a very real sense, funded them. Because when you send $100 billion to a theocratic lunatic who screams death to America and death to Israel, you know what happens? They actually follow through on that. And so this appeasement is dangerous. And you contrast a strong commander-in-chief killing General Soleimani, saying if you go after Americans, you're going to die. And what happens? The bad guys back off. You contrast that to the weakness in the Biden White House that says if you threaten Americans, if you threaten Israel, we're going to give you hundreds of billions of dollars. And they get worse. 170 attacks. And more will happen unless Biden is willing to defend U.S. troops. I have very little faith that he will be. 2
questions on this I want to ask you I think are important. Number one, there's a lot of people that remember the money we were allowing Iran to get their hands on. Yep. The State Department said, and the White House said, oh, well, they don't have the money yet. They have to act the right way to get the money. Is there any indication that that has changed at all and the policy has changed because of all these attacks? And number 2, I don't think people understand exactly when we talk about these proxy groups, these terrorist organizations that they funnel money to, funnel drones to, funnel bombs to, roadside bombs, whatever it may be. Explain why Iran does that and how many people they're working with in the Middle East.
So Iran is the world's largest state-sponsored supporter of terrorism in the world. Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas launched the October 7th attack. What percent of Hamas's budget do you think Iran funds?
I would guess 70, 80%.
It's about 90.
Wow.
About 90% of the budget comes directly from Iran. We have reporting in the Wall Street Journal that says about 500 of the Hamas terrorists who carried out the October 7th attack traveled to Iran and trained in Iran to be ready for that attack. Hezbollah. How much of Hezbollah do you think Iran funds?
I would bet at least 90%.
It's about 90% as well. Iran funds terrorists in the Middle East. They fund terrorists in South America and Central America. There are Hezbollah terrorists in Central and South America that Iran is funding. The Ayatollah, you have to understand, he's a theocratic, genocidal maniac. He refers to Israel as the little Satan. He refers to America as the great Satan. Understand, if the Ayatollah could, he would murder both of us in an instance. If the Ayatollah could, he would murder every American in New York City. He would murder every American in Los Angeles, every American in Washington, D.C. You know, the former head of the Iranian nuclear program, a scientist who...
Former head, by the way. I want to make sure we say that again so everybody pays attention to what you're about to tell, because I know where you're going with this.
And former is important. He has gone to meet his maker to see if there's 72 virgins waiting for him or not. Many say at the hand of the Mossad, at the hand of the Israelis. That's not confirmed, but that is widely speculated that the Israelis helped him on his way. He had written in his last will and testament that he wanted the following words written on his tombstone. Here lies a man who sought the annihilation of Israel. Think for a second, Ben, how much hate, how much racism, how much anti-Semitism, how much venom do you have to be filled with that you literally want your tombstone? The only thing that you want to be remembered for is I hate Jews. That was the head of Iran's nuclear program. That is the theocratic governance of this Iranian regime. And explain to me why Joe Biden keeps sending them billions of dollars to this day. We're sitting here today. We have Iran murdering 3 U.S. servicemen and women, and Joe Biden continues to allow him to sell 2 million barrels of oil a day. Tomorrow, presumably, Joe Biden's going to allow him to sell 2 million barrels of oil a day because weakness is so intertwined with the Biden foreign policy, not just weakness. They have this bizarre policy. I do not understand it. Enemies of America, they give money to, and they give them everything they want. Friends of America, they abandon, they undermine. By the way, simultaneously, the news is breaking this weekend that the Biden administration is talking about cutting off military weapons to Israel. So, billions of dollars to Iran to murder Americans, while simultaneously the Biden White House is saying, let's cut off weapons to Israel because they're killing terrorists who have murdered Americans and want to murder Americans. It is exactly backwards. It makes no sense.
Last question on this. There's a lot of people asking, okay, well, then what would the response or what should a response be from the President of the United States of America? So a lot of talking heads over the weekend that were saying, well, they're just trying to bring us into a war. And if Joe Biden responds with a heavy hand and goes after and attacks targets in Iran, we're getting into World War III, and that's exactly what they want. What is a responsible response to this from this president? What is it that he should do?
Number one, cut off the money. Dramatically enforce the oil sanctions, starve the beast. I've introduced legislation that would do that. There's an entire fleet of ghost tankers that takes the Iranian oil to China. By the way, China's buying it. Communist China is loving this. China is funding Iran. They love that Iran is distracting America from China's malevolence. So cut off the oil, number one. Number two, cut off the funds. Number three, cut off the funding for Hamas, cut off the funding for Gaza, cut off the funding for Iranian proxies. Number four, cut off the funding for UNRWA. In our next show, we're going to talk about UNRWA, the UN agency that is filled with Hamas terrorists. That news broke this weekend also. We're going to go in depth in a later podcast this week about that. But stop funding people who hate us, number one. And number two, if you kill U.S. military or U.S. civilians, pound the living crap out of them. Respond like Donald Trump did. Now, not invade Iran. I'm not saying send the Marines. I'm saying
let them know it's not worth it.
Let them know that the cost will be significantly greater than the benefit. What Joe Biden has showed them is there is no cost. That his ideology and politics is so important, he will allow Americans to be killed and will not respond. That weakness makes it more likely more Americans will be killed.
I want to tell you about our good friends over at Patriot Mobile. For more than a decade now, Patriot Mobile has been the only Christian conservative cell phone provider in the nation. And I love looking at my cell phone now because every time I look down the top left, it says Patriot. And I know that when I'm using my phone and when I pay my bill, I am working with a company that stands with my values. Now, in 2024, everybody has different New Year's resolutions. Mine was to stop giving my money to countries that literally hate my family values, hate what I stand for, and that is Big Mobile. You may not realize that Big Mobile gives big donations to Democrat causes, candidates, including Planned Parenthood. That is why I switched to Patriot Mobile, and it's why I want you to try them as well. Now, a lot of people say, hey, I don't want to switch to a company. I don't know about their coverage. Well, guess what? The coverage is exactly the same coverage you have right now. You use the same exact towers that you're using right now, except you get rid of the woke agenda of the left. So take a look at Patriot Mobile. Many times you'll save money over what you're spending right now, and every month when you pay your bill, you know you're supporting your First and Second Amendment rights, and most importantly, the rights of unborn children, as well as our military veterans, our police officers, and that's just the beginning of what Patriot Mobile does for you. You can keep your same cell phone as well and upgrade to a new phone or keep the one you have in your hand right now. Check them out, 972-PATRIOT. That's 972-PATRIOT, or online at patriotmobile.com/verdict. When you call them, use the promo code VERDICT. You'll get free activation as well. That's patriotmobile.com/verdict or 972-PATRIOT. Senator, I want to move to what was supposed to be our big story, and that was the border. There is a clear war between Texas and the Biden administration. That war was declared by the Biden administration, to be very clear, on Texas. There's a war now of the issue of states' rights. There's a war of what the Constitution says, and there's a ton of misinformation out there. I want you to explain so people understand, does the state of Texas, and any state, have the right to protect and defend itself if it's being literally invaded? That's what's happening in Texas. What does the Constitution say about this? Because there's a lot of people that have been arguing over it. I want to know, does the state of Texas have the right to defend itself if the federal government especially is not doing their job? And their job is to protect the border, right? Not just the border for Texas, but every state in the country. And they're not doing that right now. So when you look at this war, who's right and who's wrong, and what is this? What did our founders think about this?
Well, the text of the Constitution, and in particular the constitutional provision that is being discussed, is Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. And what it says is, quote, "No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops, or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state, or with a foreign power," and this is where the critical language is, "or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay." So the question, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, my good friend, has declared an actual invasion, invoking the authority of Article 1, Section 10. Article 1, Section 10 is a prohibition on the state. It says, let me omit the kind of language in the middle. It says, no state shall engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. So, under that constitutional provision, it suggests the state would have the authority to, quote, engage in war if actually invaded. Now, you asked what's the law. The truth of the matter is this is an open question constitutionally. We saw a number of years back when the state of Arizona passed legislation trying to limit illegal immigration. And during the Obama administration, the Department of Justice sued Arizona. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. There was a case, Arizona versus United States, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Obama administration. It was a decision that got strong dissents, got a strong dissent from Justice Scalia, a strong dissent from Justice Thomas, a strong dissent from Justice Alito. Now, the Supreme Court composition has changed since then. And frankly, the facts on the ground have changed since then. Listen, illegal immigration was a problem under Barack Obama. It was a serious problem under Barack Obama. But I got to say, compared to now,
it's night and day.
The Obama immigration problems seem quaint. That they are minuscule compared to what is happening now. The order of magnitude. I've joked multiple times that Joe Biden has done something I thought was impossible. He's made me miss Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Because
who would have thought Ted Cruz would ever say that?
It is. Look, on immigration, one of the astonishing things about Obama is he, by and large, followed the law. He didn't on DACA, but DACA was one unique subset of individuals, and it was a relatively limited subset. But for people crossing illegally into the country, Barack Obama deported millions of people. If you remember, during the Obama administration, the left got very mad. They called him the deporter-in-chief.
Yeah.
And that made a difference. What has happened here under Joe Biden, and we've never seen a president do this. In over 200 years of our nation's history, there's never been a president that utterly and completely defies U.S. law and lets people go by massive numbers. So, for example, there's an authority under federal immigration law called parole authority, which is you can release people in limited and special circumstances. Under Obama, he would parole roughly 5,000 illegal immigrants a year. Under Trump, it was a comparable number. So they were extraordinary circumstances. You know how much Biden is doing?
How much?
About 800,000 a year.
Wow.
He took Obama's 5,000 a year and he blew it up to 800,000. They've made a decision. We are going to allow an invasion. Now, what is Texas doing? They're laying concertina wire. They're laying basically really jagged razor wire all along the border. And in fact, here, let's look at some of the video of what they're laying and also understand the Biden administration is actively suing them, is actively attacking them, is trying to tear down the border, the wire to let cartels in and to let the invasion occur. Take a look at the governor of Texas talking about this.
Well, first, I'll be shocked. That would be a boneheaded move on his part, a total disaster. But for one, as you might imagine, we are prepared in the event that unlikely event does occur to make sure that we will be able to continue exactly what we've been doing over the past month, and that is building these barriers, whether it be the concertina wire or other anti-crime border barriers, whatever we've been building. The Biden administration is now trying to attack us because of it, and we will continue to do exactly what we're doing to expand our denial of illegal entry into the state of Texas.
You listen to the governor there, and I had an interesting debate this week with a liberal on TV who said Texas is totally wrong. They're out of line. They cannot say that they're being invaded because to say you're invaded, they have to wear a uniform of an official country that's invading you, a.k.a. a military. Would that stand up?
So under that argument, Hamas could invade. Understand how idiotic that argument is. You could have a million Hamas terrorists cross over the border and start blowing people up. They could wage October 7th, and these imbeciles would say, no, it's not an invasion because they're not a country.
And they're not wearing a uniform of that country.
Like, under that theory, October 7th in Israel was not an invasion. Like that's idiotic on its face. And by the way, I fully expect. So where does this case stand? So Texas has laid the wire along the border, particularly in Eagle Pass, miles of it.
Yeah.
The Biden administration wants to tear it down. Texas filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration saying you can't tear it down. What happened is the Biden administration won in federal district court. Texas appealed to the Fifth Circuit, the Federal Court of Appeals. Texas won in the Fifth Circuit. And what they got was an injunction, which is an order from the Fifth Circuit against the federal government tearing down the concertina wire. The United States appealed that injunction to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court 5-4 ruled in favor of the Biden administration. So where does it stand? Where it stands right now...
But in that ruling, I want to be clear, because we talked about this in a previous pod, and I want to make sure everybody that's watching this understands this. It was 5-4, but it didn't say you had to take down the razor wire either. And explain that for people that may have missed that.
So it's important to understand, number one, a ton of Democrats, a ton of reporters, a ton of leftists are saying Texas is defying the Supreme Court, is defying a Supreme Court order. That is a lie. There is no order that impacts Texas in any way, shape, or form concerning this. This was a lawsuit by Texas against the United States. There had been an order against the Biden administration. The Supreme Court took away the order against the Biden administration. So where things stand right now, if Joe Biden orders the federal government to go tear down the wire, the federal government will not be violating an injunction. Now, the court didn't say the federal government has to tear down the wire.
Bingo.
Court didn't say the federal government should tear down the wire. The court also didn't say that Texas couldn't lay more wire.
Yeah, which is what they're doing.
Right. There's no order against Texas. And injunctions are by their nature temporary and emergency proceedings. The Fifth Circuit has scheduled the oral argument in this case on the merits of the case on February 8th. February 8th, interestingly, is the same day the Supreme Court has scheduled the oral argument in the Colorado case.
Yeah, with Donald Trump.
With Donald Trump. So February 8th is going to be a big oral argument day. Whatever happens in the Fifth Circuit, that case is extremely likely to go back to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court is likely to take it and decide the issue on the merits. And that'll be decided in the next couple of months. I think the Fifth Circuit is likely to decide quickly, and I expect a rapid appeal to the Supreme Court. And understand the 5-4 decision from the Supreme Court on the injunction. It was the 3 liberals, plus John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. Now, nobody wrote an opinion, so we don't know their reasoning. By the way...
Was that interesting to you? Would you have expected opinion saying this quick, saying this big, or was it was such a quick thing to say, hey, we're going to go back to the Fifth and let them do their oral arguments? That's all we're saying about this. Hence the fact they didn't say to Texas, you got to take down the razor wire and you can't lay more of it.
Look, it is not shocking. Emergency appeals, often they don't write. They don't always write opinions. They're decided on quick emergency appeals. The underlying merits are still being litigated. By the way, there are also jurisdictional questions that are being debated in the case that are fairly arcane and legal, but they deal with whether the United States has waived sovereign immunity. In other words, whether Texas can sue the United States in federal court for an injunction. And those are technical legal questions that I don't know that we need to get into the details in this podcast, but they have nothing to do with whether the Biden administration can tear down the wire. They simply question whether Texas is able to sue the Biden administration in federal court. So there's a big dispute. A lot of the briefing, a lot of the argument focused on that jurisdictional question, which has nothing to do with the merits. So we don't know what John Roberts' reasoning was. We don't know what Amy Coney Barrett's reasoning was. To be fair, we don't know what any of the 9 justices because they didn't write. I will say this. John Roberts and federal judges generally, particularly ones that are in D.C., that are on the Supreme Court, they tend to be creatures of Washington. They tend to have a general predilection that they side with the feds against the states. Let's actually have some analysis from Jonathan Turley, who's a constitutional law professor, someone I know and respect. Here's what Professor Turley had to say.
Well, I certainly agree with the governor that this is a violation of the understanding between the federal government and the states. The language in Article 1, Section 10, really deals with that agreement that we made with the states and the federal government to move from the Articles of Confederation to a constitutional system with a strong federal government. I don't think anyone can honestly look at the southern border and say that the federal government has fulfilled its pledge. This is an unprecedented crisis brought about, I believe, by President Biden's policies. So on all that, I agree. The problem is that federal courts are unlikely to agree that this is the invasion referenced in the Constitution. There's also a reference to imminent danger. And certainly looking at hundreds of thousands of people crossing an effectively open border presents an imminent danger. But the courts are likely to define that in the context of that provision, in the context of an invasion as with a foreign state. So I think Texas is going to have a hard time making that constitutional argument in court.
I have to ask about the imminent danger part, specifically the fact that we know that people on the terrorist watch list have been coming across the open southern border.
Yep.
We had more that were caught last year that were on the terrorist watch list in the last 5 years before that combined. There's no reason to believe that number is not going to be up even higher this year based on the number that are coming across the border. Is that one of the arguments that Texas would make, obviously, right away?
Absolutely. So take a look at this tweet from Fox News. So this is from Bill Malugin, who is the best reporter on the border across the country. And by the way, every other fake news entity ought to ask, why don't they have a Bill Malugin? Why don't they have someone reporting on the facts? Because he reports on it. There's no one on CNN that does this. No one at MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, Washington Post, New York Times. Not a one of them has a Bill Malugin. He's doing heroic work. Here's what Bill Malugin reports. Breaking. In a Friday news dump, by the way, that's what the Biden administration does. It dumps all of its bad news on Friday. In a Friday news dump, CBP officially reports 302,034 migrant encounters in December, the highest month ever recorded.
And traditionally, December is not your highest month of the year, has not been, but people are rushing the border because they realize, go, it's open, hurry up.
CBP also reports Border Patrol arrested 19 people on the FBI terror watch list in December, in 1 month, bringing the total to 50 arrests for fiscal year 2024, which started in October. so far.
The 19, when you see that, Senator, you get briefings on different things, national security. That is an alarming number that we caught because that doesn't count the ones, the gotaways. And we had record gotaways in December as well.
So understand, under Trump, the number of people on the terror watch list apprehended in an entire year were in the single digits. They were like 0, 2 in an entire year. We're up to 50 in 3 months.
And 19 in the month of December alone.
Yes. So the month of December is more than any single year under Donald Trump. It may be more. I don't have the totals in front of me. It may be more than all 4 years of Donald Trump. It probably is. This is an order of magnitude. So I will say, when the case is at the Fifth Circuit, when it gets to the Supreme Court, the argument is going to have to be that what is happening at the border right now is qualitatively different than just ordinary illegal immigration. It's not that the federal government is doing a bad job, doing a negligent job, is ineffective. Any case like that would be likely to fail. It is, in this instance, the Biden administration is actively complicit in an invasion of 10 million people into this country. 10 million. That is a staggering number, including at a time the Border Patrol is telling us they're extremely worried about Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists coming in to carry out a terror act. And
not just that, they warned of an attack that could very much resemble what happened against the Israeli people.
Yes.
So they're not just saying it's like a lone wolf style attack. They're saying an orchestrated, a well-planned, well-orchestrated attack in the United States of America that could very much mimic what we just witnessed and saw in Israel.
And understand that Joe Biden, by the way, just about every Washington Democrat, are on the side of the human traffickers, are on the side of the terrorists coming in. That this suit, so look, there are aspects of this lawsuit. The Biden administration frames it as Texas is preventing the ability of Border Patrol agents to access the border. And there's a federal statute that says that agents can't access the border. And I will say, if the question is framed, can Texas officials physically stop, block, arrest a federal official from going to the border, Texas will lose that question. Can you forcibly stop a Border Patrol agent from accessing the border? I think the answer to that would be no.
So the next question everybody's going to ask is this then. Can Texas stop a Customs and Border Patrol agent who is cutting down the barbed wire and allowing people to come into the country illegally?
Well, and understand, it's not that the Border Patrol agent, the statute saying to access the border is written in the context of apprehending illegal immigrants. The Biden administration doesn't want to apprehend illegal immigrants. They want illegal immigrants to come in.
When they cut it, they're asking for them to come in.
And understand, it's not cutting it. The Biden administration wants to destroy miles of wire. So state of Texas has spent billions of dollars securing the border because the federal government won't do so. The state of Texas has built border wall. Imagine if the Biden administration was coming in with dynamite and blowing up the walls that Texas has built. Look, Texas, the reason Texas sued the United States is they said, you don't have a right to destroy our property. Imagine the federal government showed up and started blowing up state buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, under the federal government's argument, they're like, we can destroy it whatever we want. We're the feds. And Texas is saying, no, you can't. There is a limit on your ability. The state of Texas has constructed this. And it's one thing if a Border Patrol agent says, hey, I need to get to that river. I think if it were framed that narrowly, the federal courts are going to side with the ability of the federal government to get to the border. But this is the question of, does the federal government have the authority to just destroy miles and miles of wire barrier put up by the state of Texas in order to stop an invasion? And I think that's a very different question. I hope when it gets to the merits that the Supreme Court resolves it differently. Now, there are also really untested questions of constitutional law. There are potentials of direct confrontation between state officials and federal officials that could get really messy. There's also a dynamic that Biden is getting so extreme, he's facing what is potentially a revolt within the federal government.
By the way, the word they used this week on TV was insurrection. And Griff Jenkins, Fox News, put out this tweet talking about what you were just mentioning. Take a look at this, guys, because this is a very interesting scenario here. It says a senior CBP official tells Fox the relationship between Border Patrol, Texas, DPS, and the TMD remains strong. Bottom line, Border Patrol has no plans to remove infrastructure, sea wire placed by Texas along the border. Our posture remains the same. So there were people on TV saying if this is true, this is like an insurrection. I think that's absurd. But if you have federal government officials that aren't listening to the, quote, orders of the Biden administration and saying we're not going to do this, what does that mean?
Well, look, and mind you, the same people who are saying this are the Democrats, elected Democrats, and the lefties in the press who praised, for example, people in the military under Trump who they said, well, they won't follow his orders. They will resist his orders. Mind you, in this instance, look, I know the Border Patrol agents, many of them very, very well. I spent a lot of time with them. They are horrified at what Joe Biden is doing. They're watching the body bags, the death, the suffering, the children who were assaulted, the women who were raped. They're seeing it on a daily basis. And it is, look, at some level, if you have a president who is so utterly out of touch that he wages war on the law, that he's defying the law, that he is instructing them, go destroy, use my example, go bomb the walls.
Yeah.
You would expect some federal officials to say, hold on, you have no legal authority to do this. This is just an abuse of power. And look, our system, we are pushing to the edges of a constitutional crisis because we have a president who is so utterly lawless that he puts his partisan political agenda above the rule of law, above federal immigration law, above the Constitution, above people's welfare, above protecting the lives of Texans. And it is all politics all the time with the Biden White House.
I got to ask you, you just said something that was very interesting, and that was about a constitutional crisis. Texas isn't having to do this alone, thank goodness. You've got, I think it's 25 different states now that have come to the aid of Texas fighting for states' rights, saying you have a right to defend your state.
And it is powerful. Governor after governor after governor saying, we stand with Texas, we stand with Texas, we stand with Texas. And Joe Biden is trying to say to the states, I don't care. I want your state to be invaded. I want the law to be ignored because my partisan politics matter more than your obligation to protect the safety of your citizens.
So explain the rules, and this is, I think, a very important point because it's going to come up, obviously. You have some states that are sending, for example, state troopers to the state. Is that under state authority? Is that federal if you're clashing, right, if you're a trooper? And then the second part is the National Guard can work in two different scenarios, one for the governor, and then all of a sudden the federal government can come in, and that's been a big fight over the last several days of what if he nationalizes the federal, these guardsmen. How does that play out? And explain how it works if there's two different people that are your boss. Who do you decide with?
So ordinarily the National Guard is under the direction of the governors.
And the National Guard of each state is under that governor of that state.
Now, under federal law, the president has the authority to call up to nationalize the National Guard and put it under the direction of the federal government. And a bunch of folks on the left are demanding that Biden do that in Texas. I don't think he will. The clip we played of Greg Abbott, what he was responding to was the claim, what happens if he tries to nationalize the Guard? I don't think Biden will do that because it has a risk of backfiring. If he did, I'm not sure what will happen, but what he cannot nationalize is DPS troopers. He cannot nationalize the state law enforcement. And so even
the example is Florida sent a lot of state troopers to Texas this past week. There was a caravan coming up. He could have no control over them.
None whatsoever. The federal government does not have the ability to nationalize state law enforcement. So conceivably, Biden could try to nationalize the National Guard. And at that point, assuming the Guard complies with those orders, and they're not challenged in court, they're not struck down, assuming the Guard complies with those orders, it's no different than Biden sending in the Army. It is federal military, but there are still state officials and the potential for clashes. Now, do I think you're going to see state and federal officials shooting each other? No. I do think, look, you've got crazies on the left that are pushing, might you see Biden try to order federal officials to arrest state officials?
Yeah.
I think that's possible. And we are starting to get into very uncharted territory.
Who could he arrest in that scenario? Is that the governor on down? The governor, the attorney general? Are you talking about like a guy at the border who's saying, I'm not going to take down that razor wire, and they say, okay, arrest him, or who's laying razor wire, for example?
And I don't think that's going to happen, but Joe Biden is listening to the radicals, the extreme in his party, and he keeps escalating and escalating and escalating, and it's dangerous. just like Joe Biden is endangering American lives abroad, and we saw 3 servicemen and women murdered this weekend by Iranian proxies because of Joe Biden's lawlessness and support of genocidal killers. At the same time, Joe Biden is endangering Americans here because of his lawlessness and support for homicidal killers that are human traffickers and drug traffickers. In both instances, it is because this Biden White House puts politics above the safety and security of Americans. And the question every Democrat is going to have to answer, every Democrat senator, every Democrat House member, do you stand with the lawlessness and the extreme agenda of the Biden White House, or do you stand with the safety of the American people? And at least to date, just about every elected Democrat in the country puts politics above safety, and that's what makes where we are right now so extreme and so dangerous.
You just said 2 words, so extreme and so dangerous. I do want to remind people, wasn't this administration that said that the adults are finally back in charge, so we will have none of these issues? I just want to remind everybody, this is what they said about their own team.
As any connection to reality about what is going on around them, should have watched that and said, the adults are back in the room.
It seems as though we have a professional adult once again in the White House who's just simply doing the work.
Really, the theme, I would say, is the adults are back.
Still, it is a relief to have adults in charge.
Now we have adults in the White House.
Okay, the adults are back in the room.
There is a sense, I think, the world over that the adults have returned.
We have an adult in the White House now, and it's glorious.
If this is what adulting looks like, I'll take a kid in charge at this point.
God bless. So we actually, and the irony is every word of that is a lie. Well, look, Joe Biden is a senior citizen. And he may be so adult that he's not aware of what's happening. But I'll tell you, the agenda has been extreme and dangerous. And you look at things like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, incompetent, naive, ideological. It is the opposite of adult leadership. Adult leadership focuses on let's follow the law. Adult leadership focuses on we've got a task to do. Adult leadership focuses on let's keep people safe. Adult leadership focuses on what's in American interest. Adult leadership focuses on how do we stop bad guys from hurting us. Everything Joe Biden and the Democrats have done is the opposite of adult leadership. It is naive, it is dangerous, it is extreme, and the country is a lot less safe as a result.
Don't forget, we do the show Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. We do a week in review on Saturdays as well. And if you're watching this, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. One of these episodes a week on average we do on video as well. We put it up on X. We put it up on Facebook, so you can watch it there. And don't forget as well, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button, especially if you're listening on Apple, as they've changed their algorithms for 2024. The Senator and I will see you back here on Wednesday morning.